Hi, I'm Darryl Brown, and welcome to Shades of Us, a show that explores multicultural identities and how they intersect. April is Earth Month, a time to celebrate our planet and take action to protect it. There are many individuals and organizations that are finding ways to reduce climate warming emissions. We'll examine some of the initiatives that are raising awareness about sustainable practices here in New York City. Tell you more right after this. According to a 2023 Pew Research Center survey on how Americans view future harms from climate change in their community and around the U.S., 41% of respondents think their own community will become a worse place to live over the next 30 years due to the effects of climate change. Only 7% think climate impacts will make conditions in their community better. Within the past few years, urban agriculture and community farming have become all the rage. But one particular CUNY professor has been at the forefront of local urban farming for over a decade, actively advocating for biodiverse food systems that support and encourage healthy eating choices.
Climate change, natural disasters, pandemics, these kinds of things affect our food system. They affect the food chain. Even recently, I've noticed over the past couple of weeks in New York City, we've had some pretty crazy weather, and that led to less food in the supermarkets. And I think that if we don't have a strong local food system, it's going to be difficult to access the food when there are these major emergencies that are happening. My name is Dr. Shannon Caravello. I'm an assistant professor in the Health and Phys Ed Department in Health Sciences, and I'm also the Community Farm and Garden Administrator here at the KCC Community Farm and Garden. I started at the farm well over a decade ago. I was an adjunct professor at the time, and I came here specifically because of food insecurity. I was a mother on SNAP benefits, and I needed to support my 2 kids, and I thought that this would be a good way to help supplement my income in terms of bringing in healthy food, because with the SNAP benefits it wasn't very much, and I thought this might be a good way to put a little bit of sweat equity in, have some skill acquisition to be able to grow my own. And since I had that here, I said, let me go ahead and take a shot, and turns out it set me on a whole career path, which I'm really excited about. So with the farm, there's lots of things that happen depending on the different seasons. Currently, we're in full propagation mode. So essentially what happens is every day we will come in and start off by planting seeds in a propagation chamber in our farm shed, and we will bring those seeds out in the trays here. We'll plant them, we'll get them set up, and then every night, because the weather is too cold, we'll bring them back into a warmer environment, and then we'll bring them out. It's called hardening off, and it just stabilizes them to be planted out. Everything we grow here is distributed to our students. So mid-April till about mid-November, we will distribute all the produce on a weekly basis. And we can grow anywhere from 2,500 to 4,000 pounds of produce for a growing season. We have a very large population of food insecure students at Kingsborough specifically and at CUNY across the campuses. So we're already meeting the community needs, and we want to support that because healthy eating leads to better educational outcomes. I've watched students just blossom and bloom, total pun intended, where they'll come in and not know anything, and the next thing you know, they're out there advocating for this food system, and it puts them more in connection with the food system because so many of us are so disconnected, especially those of us who were born and raised in New York City. A lot of students will talk about the conversation when it comes to pesticides about, is this strawberry healthy for me or not healthy for me because it has pesticides? And I say to them, okay, it's nice that you want that strawberry to be healthy for you, but what about the health of the other people that are growing that strawberry? What about the pesticides that are being put somewhere else in the environment where this strawberry is growing, and the environmental impact of the metric tons of pesticides that are being put into living environments that people are working in and living in? They're accumulating these pesticides on their body, bringing it home to their families, and it's spreading outwards. So I want them to not just think about the environmental degradation on a small scale, but on a bigger scale. What's the impact of the food choices that I'm making? Just letting students know that there are different types of agriculture out there and how that agriculture is important, because if you're doing a good organic system, you're looking at a biodiverse farm, they're feeding the soil, versus monoculture in conventional growing where they're not feeding the soil. So having that conversation about how soil health matters is super important. At the end of the day, the key is to get seeds and plants into the ground so we can produce food. I come at it from an emergency situation. If we can't have access to this food because there's disruption in transportation, having some emergency backup, growing in our community gardens, growing in our local parks even, it's not going to save everything, but it will certainly help supplement. And when we bring in the conversation with students about how to grow things and the weather, we talk about how things are difficult for us right now as a farm. We don't know what's going to happen from day to day because a couple of weeks ago we had snow. Today it's 65 degrees. And so that puts a lot of stress on the plants, and it causes us to have to renegotiate our crop plan and to figure out what are we going to grow. And that's part of the conversation when we bring people into the space, that we say climate change is disrupting us. We really take it day by day, and we are critical thinkers, and we have to work fast on our feet to say, okay, this is happening, what are we going to do? So my attitude is, well, we're going to need to grow for whatever's going to happen. We want to be ready to continue to move forward. And as somebody in the Crohn's and colitis community, it's important to have these conversations about healthy eating because a lot of autoimmune diseases are becoming epidemic at this point, and a lot of that has to do with some of the food additives that are coming in and disrupting our gut microbiome. We have a lot of environmental bioaccumulation that's happening, environmental impact happening on us that we need to address, and we need to have those conversations so people can make better decisions and to support better agricultural systems that are going to help them. So now I'm learning about grant writing and bringing funding into the farm and how important that is. The administrative part of how much work goes into running a farm, making sure we order what we need, and working around obstacles, and knowing that with time, I'm going to get through. With time, we're going to make a difference. And sharing that with other people. During the pandemic, we could have disappeared. We weren't going to let that happen. I didn't want that to happen. I mean, there were times I was here by myself, this lone faculty member saying, I'm going to plant and try to grow something and make things happen, just even to build the community. So maybe we didn't have as much production, but we built a nice, strong community. That alone, to me, at the end of the day, is the most important thing, that we're connecting on a human level and making people's lives better.
Rich in history, the Brooklyn Navy Yard was once a prominent leader in shipbuilding. Now the waterfront property has become a hub for urban manufacturing and a testbed for innovative technologies, leading the way to a greener future for New York City.
We're a community of doers and contributors, and we want to be one of the epicenters for climate solutions. My name is Lindsay Green. I'm the President and CEO of the Brooklyn Navy Yard Development Corporation, which is a 300-acre waterfront industrial park on the Brooklyn waterfront, and we exist to support middle-class jobs and economic opportunity by being a home to businesses that are at the heart of urban manufacturing and innovation. There are 550 businesses that are based here, and they employ over 11,000 people and collectively generate almost $2.5 billion of economic impact in a year. And we exist to support them and make sure they're succeeding and thriving. Leading the Navy Yard is one part running a very large property with aging infrastructure and buildings, and one part trying to manage a community that feels a lot like a small city. We have a lot of really interesting climate solutions companies. We have one company that is basically a two-man shop now that is making carbon-based ice melt for the road so that the literal salt that you put on the road to help with the snow melt isn't as pollutive as normal. That's a really interesting company. We have another company that's here that is making polyester fiber out of basically sugar, and it helps the company transform their fashion supply chain with plant-based materials. And the Navy Yard has a legacy of supporting pilots for our startups. One of our most famous pilots was City Bike. Before they did their citywide launch, they had their first docking stations here. Going back to when the Navy was here, this place opened in 1801 and became a real hub of opportunity for a lot of people across Brooklyn. At its peak in World War II, there were 70,000 people that worked here. And it was just sort of awesome that there was that many people in this contained space. But the real contribution was the fact that the Navy Yard employed a lot of people of color and a lot of women in skilled jobs when not a lot of other places were doing that. I think at its peak, there were 7,000 women here in working roles, not just in executive assistant positions or, cafeteria positions. There were women who were welders and doing the jobs that the men couldn't do because they were at war. And that continuity of supporting women in the workforce and supporting people of color in the workforce is something we take up as our mission as a city nonprofit that manages the Navy Yard today. We have a general visionary plan released several years ago that provides for our ability to build up to 5 million square feet. We have 3 sites identified across the campus that will allow us to build new facilities, and we intend to have those buildings be state-of-the-art modern industrial facilities, be energy efficient themselves, as well as provide for all the right mechanical and electrical supply to support our tenants and keep their workforce safe. The second piece of that plan, in addition to the buildings, is that we will evolve what we do to connect people to those jobs. So we've always had an employment center here, dating back to when the Navy was recruiting civilians in its war efforts. We have an employment center here that does several hundred placements per year at jobs with the tenants that are here, doing industrial activity. So we will continue to grow that. Industrial jobs are, by their nature, even as they're getting more technical, doesn't require a ton of educational degrees. You don't have a big alphabet behind your name to get a job here. You have to have some good skills and be able to learn quickly. And so we put people together with those opportunities and try to connect them to the training, but we're really focused on doing that for local New Yorkers, particularly women and people of color. So the next chapter of the Yard is really about making space for industry of the future. It's a place for you to pilot. And so we formalized that program here, as did our colleagues at Governor's Island at the Brooklyn Army Terminal. And that's one of the first places we have gotten together to coordinate piloting across the city. And that's a key cornerstone of the Harbor Climate Collaborative. And we created the Brooklyn STEAM Center here at the Navy Yard. And the model is really workplace immersion, work-based learning. So students have their home high schools that they go to, but they spend half their day here at the STEAM Center so they can focus on information technology, they can focus on culinary skills, they can focus on design and engineering, they can do media studies, or they can do construction. My hope is that we at the Navy Yard will be known as a hub for climate solutions. And all the better if as many folks as possible working in those jobs. Some of the folks founding those companies that are working on those solutions are women and people of color and persons of disabilities, people whose voices aren't typically at the seat of power. But if we're literally building a new industry, why not build it with the diversity that reflects the city and the country we live in?
Our next segment takes us to Baruch College and a new course about climate justice being offered at the Department of Black and Latino Studies.
So what does that look like in New York with trees? I'm going to ask you to think about that when you go back and you start revising. Start there.
I am Dr. Shelley Eversley. I'm a professor of English at Baruch College and interim chair of Black and Latino Studies. At Baruch, in the Weissman School of Arts and Sciences, we offer a new course called Climate Justice.
What does that mean for people in Queens? What does that mean for people in the Lower East Side?
Climate justice is a term that we use to describe the climate emergency and how it impacts people. People who contribute the least, and the countries that contribute the least to the climate emergency, are the countries and people and communities that suffer the most. So one of the key ways of us thinking about the climate emergency and climate justice is to see the intersections between social inequalities, racial inequalities, economic inequalities, and how those inequalities inform the unequal distribution of suffering when it comes to the climate emergency. Individual advocacy efforts regarding the climate emergency begin at the level of the individual. At Baruch, our students in the climate justice course are creating documentaries where they connect their personal stories to their learning about the data, the science, and the policy around remediating the climate emergency.
The IPCC is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change.
And in so doing, they are empowered to become contributors to the solution. They are empowered to be agents for more just futures, more sustainable futures. Marginalized communities face many critical injustices and many hardships because of the climate emergency that they did not cause. For instance, extreme weather, whether we're talking about heat, flooding, cold weather, all of these things directly and more profoundly impact working class people, Black and brown people, poor people, people in communities that don't have the money or the means to be able to remediate them. So for instance, migration. 84 million people in the world have migrated because of the climate emergency. Most of those people are coming from low-income countries or communities. In New York, you can think about it in terms of people living in the Rockaways. When Superstorm Sandy came in 2012, they were forced to move. Many of these people didn't have the funds, the reserve in their own savings to relocate. Many people, because of Superstorm Sandy, ended up in homeless shelters or were displaced from their family homes, multi-generational family homes, for years. In places like Puerto Rico, for instance, we saw what happened with Sandy and Maria, Hurricane Maria. When it hit Puerto Rico, it was the poorest people who didn't have access to electricity, to water, to housing, to any kind of remediation, and they suffered illnesses, they suffered economic hardships, businesses closed, people had to move from their homes, and many people ended up in New York City with their families living in multi-generational apartments, overcrowded. You know, the list can go on. Some organizations that have effectively addressed climate justice issues in New York, one that I'm really excited about is the Point CDC in the Bronx. And they're a community organization that are really organizing the people who live in the South Bronx who are disproportionately suffering from asthma because of the CO2 emissions that come from the industries that locate themselves in the South Bronx, because of the overabundance of highways that surround those communities in the Bronx. The South Bronx Unite, another community organization, is another great example. In Manhattan's Lower East Side, there's Goals, good old Lower East Side, that is organizing community members of the diversity of economic backgrounds, languages, and cultures so that they can actually find some remediation and participate in the solutions that are addressing the Lower East Side with regards to flooding, with regards to heat, and other kinds of weather climate emergencies. When it comes to addressing climate justice concerns, governments have a really important role to play. And most importantly, that role should be one that centers the people that elected those officials, not the corporations, not the moneyed interests. Ask the people what they need, and they will tell you. Racial justice and economic justice is central to thinking about solutions regarding the climate emergency. If it is that those who suffer the most are those who contribute the least, and those who suffer the most are disproportionately working class, then the climate emergency is an issue of economic justice. If the people who are suffering the most are people who are living in the South Bronx, who are living in East New York, who are living in the Lower East Side, who are living in Queens with children with asthma, and they are disproportionately Black and brown, then the climate emergency is a racial justice issue. Some advice for how we can incorporate principles of environmental advocacy into our everyday lives, into our individual work, into our communities, is to tell stories, to educate ourselves about the key terms and the ways in which we can participate in the energy transition, in the ways in which we can think responsibly about all the sort of collateral emergencies that are connected to the climate emergency, like migration, like extreme weather, like economic inequality. All of these things are connected.
And that's just one way for us to see how storytelling is the connector. It's the great human connector. This is why the humanities are so important.
Meet an indigenous environmental and climate justice leader whose organization works to help communities impacted by climate change.
I feel like I am literally putting myself on the line to make sure that 7 generations yet unborn has a place where they can live, where they could thrive, where they could have the kind of lives that they deserve. My name is Elizabeth Jean-Pierre. I'm the executive director of Upburrows, and Upburrows works at the intersection of racial justice and climate change. We are an intergenerational organization that is women-led. It is an organization that is led by the front line, by people of color, the ones most likely to be impacted by climate change. I think that people of African and indigenous ancestry have always been matriarchal, have always taken care of the mother, of Mother Earth. We've always lived within our carbon footprint. We haven't been the ones that have been contributing to massive levels of carbon and co-pollutants in our communities. And so I think that we need to reclaim our land, take our land back. Environmental justice is our response to fight the siting of environmental burdens in communities of color and Black and brown communities. Anything like power plants, waste transfer stations, brownfields. Climate justice is a little different. Climate justice is sort of birthed by the environmental justice movement. And it's the fact that recurrent extreme weather events are going to exacerbate all of the problems that exist in our community. Climate justice is sort of the frontline response. And when we say frontline, we're talking about Black and indigenous people who have had to deal with the legacy of extraction, colonialism, and enslavement. And climate change is the result of that. So Upburrows was founded in 1966. It's the oldest Latino community-based organization in Brooklyn. And it was founded to address the social service needs of the emerging Puerto Rican community that was moving up from Red Hook. I became the executive director in 1996. I came into this work literally because people in the community, they were concerned about a lot of the health disparities that are connected to the environmental conditions that exist in this community and conditions that I live with, that my family lives with because I was born and raised in an environmental justice community. And so I didn't come to this work with wanting to be an environmentalist or even thinking about that. I'm a civil rights lawyer in training. I was fighting against extreme policing, but I think that it's our responsibility to use our education and our resources to advance community priorities. And so early on in my first year, I'm sort of thinking, how can we complement the work that is taking place in Sunset Park? And how can we evolve in an organization that we have a culture of practice that honors our ancestors, but also provides the community with the support that they need so that we can transform the landscape. My family's been in Sunset Park since 1980, and we live here. It is a very mixed community, and I think that's what makes it really cool. What we have is a community of over 130,000 people who are predominantly indigenous. I would say indigenous from, Guatemala, Honduras, Mexico, Caribbean, from Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic, a lot of Asians, mostly Fujin. Because our campaigns come from the community, we literally feel like we staff the community. We didn't say to the community, we're going to do this. We were asked, can you help us with this? And then here, what we do is we do the research, we collect the data, we figure out what the land use plan is, and then we share that with the community. We've doubled the amount of open space, we've stopped the siting of power plants, we have pushed back against development that would have displaced our community, and we've done that successfully. In 2013, we all came together to build a thing called the B, Building Equity and Alignment for Impact. We knew that there was tension between the climate activists and those of us who are frontline leaders. In 2014, we become part of the leadership of the People's Climate March, where we decide we're going to hold the largest climate march in the history of the United States. 400,000 people show up for the march in New York City. And it's also the year that we found the Climate Justice Alliance. For years during the civil rights movement and past that, decisions were made by grass-top organizations that decided in the Beltway, in DC, what was in the interest of communities like ours. We flipped that table, and we're saying that the national agenda, the national priorities have to be defined by what is happening on the ground. So UPROSE and about 89 other organizations and formations are part of the Climate Justice Alliance who have flipped the conversation and have created a national agenda that honors the local struggles and the local priorities. I am the co-chair of the Climate Justice Alliance, and it is a national organization of frontline leaders from Puerto Rico to Guam. We are working to operationalize a just transition. We are collectively working to move away from the extractive economy to a regenerative economy. And we're doing that because, the problems are different in different places. UPROSE is a member of the Climate Justice Alliance, and UPROSE is also a member of the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance and is a co-founder of New York Renews. New York Renews is responsible for creating the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. That is literally shifting power, where we're saying, you know what? You all don't get to helicopter in our communities and make decisions about us, without us. We will determine what's the legislation, what are the priorities, how are we going to invest in infrastructure, how are we going to make sure that industrial sectors are retrofitted and that they're greened up so that they are green manufacturing and not polluting and contaminating our spaces. So in the climate justice movement, we want to be able to build and do in a way that is meaningfully intergenerational. That's important because UPROSE became intergenerational my first year when young people came in with this attitude, like, what do you do here? And I was like, fill it up and we'll figure out what we do together. I started to train them on everything that I knew, and I trained them to organize, and they became the backbone of the organization. There's young people on our board, on my staff. They've been part of environmental justice organizations now for years, many, many years. They've grown up in the organizations, but it has shaped their career path, right? And some people talk about the pipeline of leadership, and we don't use the word pipeline here. We use vine. It's a vine of leadership. Some young people are creatives, and that's how they influence and shape how we think about climate justice. There isn't anything right now that young people are studying or that young people are doing, regardless of whether it's filmmaking or it's accounting, that isn't going to be shaped and impacted by climate change. So they have to all be involved at some level of figuring out how to integrate a climate lens to the work that they're doing, because no sector, no discipline is safe. Everything is going to be impacted by climate disruption. So getting them involved early on is important. It's necessary.
That's our show. If you want to know more about the guests we featured, check out our Instagram page at Shades of Us TV and online at tv.cuny.edu. I'm Darryl Brown. See you next time on Shades of Us.